guys, so today's video is going to be a little bit about how the Cambridge medical degree is structured in the first year. I'm going to tell you what all of the different courses we study are in first year. It changes in second year again, but yeah, let's get going and I hope you enjoy the video. So I'm going to start with the big three that we do. So in first year we study three sort of main topics called MIMS, Hom and Fab. And each of these kind of covers most of the concepts that you need in first year, and all of our exams in the summer, so in June, cover these three aspects of our course. So I'm going to start with MIMS. So MIMS stands for Molecules in Medical Science, and Hom is the next one I'm going to talk about, and Hom is short for Homeostasis, and then we've got Fab, which means Functional Architecture of the Body. We actually share MIMS and Hom with the vet students. So although we're obviously looking at humans and the vets are talking about animals, a lot of the concepts are kind of the same. So especially with MIMS, when it's kind of the biochemistry and the stuff that goes on inside the cells, fundamentally it's the same with most kind of organisms and mammals. So we share that with the vets, and we also share Hom. So Hom is to do with kind of, well, as I mentioned, it's homeostasis, but really I think most medical schools would call it physiology. And that's kind of to do with like how systems in the body work. So we talk about the cardiovascular system, the renal system, respiratory system, and again that kind of thing is similar amongst most organisms. So yeah, we share these things with the vets. But obviously functional architecture of the body, that's anatomy, and that is different between the vets and the medics, so you do that separately from them. But yeah, we share supervisors for the first two, and the exam papers will be the same as well. So those are the big main three that we talk about and we study kind of all year long. Up to the Easter holiday, we also study two other courses called FEBP and SECHI. And FEBP stands for the Foundations of Evidence-Based Practice. Again, we share this with the vets. It's kind of like, a lot of people say it's stats, but in reality it's kind of analysing scientific papers, identifying the methods that are used in research. We have one paper examining that one at the end of this term, so at the end of Lent term, end of March. And then we also study SECHI, which is the social and ethical context of health and illness. That one we don't share with the vets, but we have an exam in that one at the end of this term as well. And that's kind of, oh, I love SECHI so much. So that's like the ethics, medical law, all of the kind of human side of medicine that is about caring for patients and working in the health service, that kind of stuff. That's what SECHI is. The other thing that we do is PFP, and that is called Preparing for Patients. Preparing for Patients changes every year, but we still study it throughout the undergraduate course. So in first year we have 2 GP placements. In second and third year we go kind of in and out of hospital, but not as much as we will do when we're actually on full-time clinical placement. But this one is a kind of, they don't focus on it so much in the first year at Cambridge, but it just gives you a little bit of patient experience just to keep you kind of in touch with what the end goal of the degree is. Okay, so let's start with MIMS. And so as I said, that was Molecules in Medical Science. We share this with the vets, and it is one of our main big components that we do. So in first year, you study MIMS all the way through, right up until the exam, and we have 3 lectures on average in this subject a week. Most other medical schools would kind of call this biochemistry or biomedicine. It's not so much kind of like drugs and pharmaceuticals, that happens more in second year. But in first year it's kind of genetics, we do cancer, we do DNA, like the structure of DNA. Last term we did biometabolism. We also did a lot on proteins, which are quite important biological molecules, as you will learn when you come to medical school. So it's all of the kind of subcellular stuff, and it's a fascinating kind of branch in medicine, a very, very kind of macromolecule. We're looking at small stuff here that goes on within cells. All of the chemical reactions, it's quite chemistry based. If you come to Cambridge, they recommend, in fact they require that you've studied chemistry at A level. This course is basically the reason why they recommend that. For example, we learn about the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. There's a lot of enzymes in that, and we've got to know what they kind of all do. And although often it can feel like kind of irrelevant and not really relevant to modern day medicine, it really is. And thankfully the lecturers do quite a good job of kind of including examples as to how this kind of subcellular, really small chemical stuff is part of medicine and has a big role to play. In terms of the exam, we have essays, we have a practical component, and we also have multiple choice questions. We have 1 supervision a week for MIMS. As I've said, we share it with the vets. And yeah, it's quite good fun. I do quite enjoy it. We also do a problem-based learning element to MIMS, which means that once a term we work in groups with other medics and vets across the year group, small groups of about 4 or 5, sometimes 6, to come up with a presentation that we give to a small group of other medics and vets about a particular topic. So this term my group is working on a presentation about Alzheimer's, because that's kind of, well, they're not sure, that's the whole point, but basically it might be partly down to genetics, so we're looking at the role that genetics and kind of DNA might have on Alzheimer's. So really interesting stuff, and that's MIMS. Then we'll move on to HOM. So HOM is short for homeostasis, as I've said, and other medical schools will use this as physiology. It's talking about body systems, so the main ones we do in first year are circulatory system, respiratory system. So when I say circulatory, I also mean like cardiovascular, respiratory, renal, and then the first one we did, so we did like nerves and muscles, musculoskeletal and nervous system. So that's kind of building on a lot of the stuff that you learn at A level, especially if you do biology. I know Cambridge doesn't say you have to do biology, but definitely for HOM it helps if you've studied it. You can kind of see the more clinical side of medicine in HOM than you can with MIMS, I think. So obviously it's these big body systems, and everybody knows that you can specialise and you become a renal consultant, or you can become a cardiovascular surgeon, or you can study neurons and you can become a neurosurgeon. So I think HOM people seem to find a bit more relevant to clinical medicine. But don't get me wrong, there's a lot of science going on here, and it links quite nicely to quite a lot of the things that you study in MIMS as well. So you might study the structure of ion channels in MIMS, while there's a lot of ion channels going on in HOM, as you will find if you come to Cambridge and do medicine or veterinary medicine. We have 1 supervision a week, we have essays, we have MCQs, and we have practical paper, so basically the same as MIMS in terms of the exam structure. The practical element of HOM this year has been quite good. So because everything's been online, practicals have basically not happened. But they've done a really good job at putting them online for us. So we've had pretty much 1 practical a week online. It takes a couple hours, you just work through a worksheet or an online website that we use. They have little graphs you can mess around with. It is quite good, the practical element is quite good, and I'm very grateful that we've been able to do this. A subsection of the HOM course that we also study is histology, and histology isn't some sort of like weird acronym, it doesn't stand for anything, it literally is just what it says. It is histology. Some medical schools count this under anatomy, but we do it here under homeostasis, under physiology. So that's looking at microscope slides. We have 1 practical every 2 weeks for that, which takes a few hours. We just work through that online again. They send us the slides. We have an online sort of app that lets us view the slides in amazing detail. It's really cool, actually. Yeah, I didn't think looking at cells would be that interesting, but it is really cool. I mean, we literally cover pretty much all cell types in the body. So this term we've been looking at white blood cells, we've been doing cells that line the digestive tract, the GI tract, yeah, all sorts. And you have to learn, there's a lot of words and terminology, but it's quite interesting, and you get to look at lots of pretty slides on, so that's quite nice. And it ties in really well with all of the courses that we study. So it ties in with HOM, it ties in with MIMS, and it ties in with anatomy. So histology is quite cool, Cambridge. And then the last big one that we do, which we don't share with the vets, as I've said, is FAB, Functional Architecture of the Body. And that kind of encompasses, as I've said, that's like anatomy, but we also study embryology as part of that. So we have 1 or 2 lectures a week for that. We also have self-teaching modules where basically we get given a booklet of different parts of the body. So at Cambridge we start with the upper limb, which is the arm, and then we do the like the neck, the thorax, and kind of all of this region, and that's all in the first term. And then in the second term, which is the term we're in now, Lent term, you do the abdomen and the legs, lower limb, and yeah, you don't do any more anatomy teaching in the final term of the year. So summer term, we call it Easter term at Cambridge. All dissection happens in the first 2 terms. This year it's been a little bit different. We had dissection last term, but unfortunately with lockdown this term everything is online. But the amazing anatomy department have managed to sort of live stream dissection to us, so we are still able to benefit from that to quite a fair extent. Well, we have 1 supervision a week as standard minimum. Our supervisor at Trinity Hall has been very generous, giving us 2 supervisions a week. For those of you that don't know, supervisions are sort of small group teaching, 2 or 3 of us at a time for an hour with a supervisor who's an expert in the field. They just work through the things that you've covered in lectures that week. Exam again is essays, multiple choice questions. Yeah, anatomy is really cool. There's a lot to it. It's quite a heavy subject. There's a lot of names. You will get used to learning the names, and eventually the kind of Latin and the terminology will make sense to you. The embryology is taught predominantly through lectures. That's another quite interesting aspect of the course, and it links really well with the main anatomy, so you kind of study things at the same time. So currently we're doing the abdomen, and we've been doing kind of like the kidneys and things like that. We've also been studying renal and hom, so the courses all kind of link together. But yeah, so we've been doing the kidneys in anatomy, but then in embryology we've been learning about how the kidneys form. So all of the courses link together, and that really does aid your learning. As for kind of like the practical element of anatomy, we don't have like a practical paper like we do for MIMS and HOM, but we do have dissection. That's our main practical element of anatomy. So normally pre-COVID we'd be going into the dissecting room once or twice a week. We'd be working through, following all the body systems that I've mentioned already. We did do a bit of that last term, though it was quite limited. We only went 4 times, but it was an amazing experience. It's so cool. You know, the cadavers are it's a privilege to be able to work with like real bodies that people have donated to science. It's an experience that I don't think I'll ever forget, and I'm very grateful to have been able to do it at all. Hopefully I'll be able to do some more of it in second year when we specialise in, we do head and neck anatomy in second year, so it's a bit different. Just this bit's really complicated, so they do like a whole year on that, and then they do a whole year on like the rest. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to being able to go back to the dissecting room. I am missing it this term, but we don't really have like a practical element that we do like have in MIMS and HOM. And then we alternate dissection with clinical anatomy. So we have an applied anatomy Zoom session every other week, whereby we basically work in small groups in breakout rooms with some of the anatomy supervisors from various colleges, and we discuss 4 different cases. So they'll give you like a history of a patient. Like patient A comes into the clinic, they've got stomach pain that is initially quite dispersed, and then it localizes to the epigastric region. So they expect you to then interpret what you've been told, come up with a potential diagnosis, and then you talk through it, and that is really useful for actually applying what you've learned. Again, as I've said before, we don't have much patient contact in the first 3 years of the course at Cambridge, so it just keeps the goal kind of in the back of your mind. Like, don't forget that at the end of the day you are training to be a doctor, and this kind of makes it all seem really relevant. And I quite enjoy the Zoom. I know some people don't, but I think it's a good opportunity to get to see other students online, and you can do it from the security of your room, which is quite nice. So yeah, I think people will grow to like the Zoom more, but it is really useful, and being able to go through the cases is quite good. So I do quite enjoy it. We have ours on a Friday afternoon as well, so it's kind of a nice end to the week. Yeah. Let's do FEBP because we share that with the vets. So a lot of being a doctor is reading papers. You have to keep educated all the time about the different methods of treatment, treating patients, you know, drugs that are being trialled, all of that stuff. You're expected to be able to keep up to date with that news and the papers coming out that are published. And in order to spot which papers you can trust and what you should be able to read, you need to be able to know how to spot kind of a phony paper effectively, or a paper that's just a bit weak. The argument is weak, the test they did was not sufficient, the trial was kind of not suitable and not very well conducted, and FEBP teaches you how to do that. As I've said, most medical schools would call this stats, but we're not actually learning so much about how to do the stats ourselves, but more to recognise which methods should be used and when. So the main way they teach FEBP is through lectures. We have 1 online lecture a week. I think it's 6 a term. They are live, so they're on Zoom, and they just cover all of the different statistical methods, how you interpret a p-value, a confidence interval. So it is kind of statistical analysis, but we aren't exactly expected to calculate the statistical numbers and methods ourselves. It's more about being able to recognise when they should and shouldn't be used. So we don't have supervisions in these courses. They're not the main ones that we study. They're not HOM, MIMS and FAB. But we do have seminars. So we have 1 seminar a term, and that's basically, it's kind of like a supervision, but it's a group of 6 students rather than 2 or 3. We're doing it with another college. Some of the other medics at a different college. I think I'm doing it with Emmanuel College. And we just talk through like an example paper, pick out the bits of the paper that aren't very good. If the trial was kind of not very well conducted, we discuss that. So it's all about recognising evidence-based practice, basically. So understanding what good evidence is for approving a drug and using a treatment. It's a really interesting aspect of the course, especially this year, because there are so many papers being published about like COVID-19 and new treatment methods, and obviously vaccine trials are well underway. So it seems quite relevant, and I'm quite enjoying it. But they teach it in a very, very quick way. The lectures are quick and fast, and I think there's a lot of expectation that students go away and kind of understand the methods themselves in their own time. So as the exam draws closer, I will have to work on that myself. But the exam happens at the end of Lent term, which is the term we're in now. So it is probably about 35 days away until my exam for FEBP. We sit one exam, it's 45 minutes, multiple choice. So it's actually a new course this year. They used to call it ISBM, which I think was an introduction to the scientific basis of medicine. And now we have something quite, well, not quite different, it's a bit different. But yeah, so we are the first year group to study FEBP here at Cambridge. But it is quite interesting, it's a quite different aspect of the course. It's not a main one, it's not particularly science-based, but it is definitely something that's quite important that we do. So that's it for the ones that we share with the vets. The rest of these we do on our own as medics. So the other one we are examined in this term is called SECHI. That is the social and ethical context of health and illness. Oh my gosh, so many of these. Okay, I remembered it now. Social and ethical context of health and illness. And we do lectures once a week again. Last term they were on the social side of things. This term it's more medical ethics and law. I think SECHI is a really interesting course. I think there's a lot of reading involved. I have to admit, yeah, it does take quite a bit of your own time. The lectures kind of introduce you to what you should be reading, and they briefly skim over the concepts. But the concepts that they do discuss are really cool. So this term we're going to have a lecture on like euthanasia. We've just had a lecture on medical law. There's one on justice within healthcare. So how do you set up a healthcare system that works to benefit the most people? There's different like philosophical concepts in there. It's quite cool. And then last term we did social side. So you learn about how socioeconomic situations can lead to different health outcomes for individuals, and how even things like the north-south divide, or your ethnicity, or where in the country you live, or the type of education you had can impact your quality of health, which is such a cool concept in medicine that people just overlook all the time. People just think, oh, you're ill because you contracted a disease or because you smoke cigarettes, but no one really goes that far as to consider why that is. Why have you contracted the illness? Is it to do with the house that you live in? Is it because you live in poverty? Is it because you're stressed? You know, this part of the course covers that, and I think it's key in teaching students about the GMC, which is the General Medical Council guidelines for what makes a good doctor. And so it's kind of crucial that we learn this stuff. I know we're only first year medics out of 6 years, but it's important that we keep this in mind all the way through the course. So definitely SECHI is quite an interesting topic. In terms of the exam, we have one at the end of this term. It's 2 essays. We have to also bring in patient experience and what we've learned from hearing patient stories. So it does keep it all relevant. I think it is a really cool part of the course. I'm a bit unsure about how it's going to work this year with the exams, because they're online, they're meant to be closed book, and we have to quote papers. But I will update you on how those exams go. So yeah, again, that's kind of like in 35 days time, so not long to go. But SECHI is a really interesting part of the course, and I know a lot of students go on to look at that specifically in 3rd year when they specialise a bit more. And then the final part of the course that we do, unless I've missed anything, is preparing for patients, so shortened to PFP. We have A, B, C and D, so PFP-A is what we study in 1st year, and in 1st year, I think I mentioned earlier, it's basically 2 general practice placements. Normally we would go out into the community and do these. This year they've been online. So again, we're in small groups across colleges. I'm working with 3 students from Trinity College. We are placed into 2 groups of 2, and we basically get to speak to patients, which is really cool. So we sit in on a GP consultation. Last term we had a long case. So basically that's a patient that has a chronic condition, they've had it for a long time, they've been seeing their GP about it for a while, and we get to sit in and speak to that patient with the supervision of the GP, ask them about the condition, and then we have to do a 600-word write-up of that meeting. We then do a second placement this term, so I've got mine coming up next week, and I'm doing the short case this time, so myself and my practice placement partner will be each taking on board 1 patient and then giving each other feedback on how we did. Yeah, it's quite different to the long case, but again, it's a 600-word write-up, and that's kind of how we're assessed with PFP. There's no formal assessment, nothing in the exam hall type thing. And it's mostly about kind of building a rapport with the patient. This is kind of communication skills side of the course. It's quite good fun. I wish we kind of did it a bit more, but to be honest, we learn so much other stuff. There's just not the time to do it in first year. But yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm looking forward to doing it in second and third year. And definitely, I do think it helps still keeping things relevant and remembering why you're being, why you're at medical school, why you're training. Getting to speak to patients is really rewarding, and actually seeing and hearing and learning about other people's conditions is quite a privilege. Not many people get to do it, so it's a fun part of the course and a nice thing to do in the middle of the term. So it's week 4 this week, and I've got my placement, so I'm quite looking forward to that. So yeah, that's kind of it. That's the structure of first year medicine at Cambridge. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. If you want to know more, please drop a question in the comments section. I will do my best to answer, but I will see you guys next time.